This breakdown is so fetch. Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. I'm continuing my Masculine Feminine Energies film breakdown series with Mean Girls. If you're not familiar with what I mean by masculine and feminine energies, I talk about this in most of my videos, but a brief summary. Masculine and feminine energies are energies that live within all of us. We all contain both energies, but we all have a core energy. This is when we're most ourselves in. That energy may link up with our gender. It doesn't have to, but it very often does. And each of these energies contains archetypes, and we all contain all of the archetypes within us that we can tap into whenever we need to. I have a lot of videos about the masculine and the feminine archetypes. And in order to have sexual polarity in a relationship, you need one partner to be in the masculine and one partner to be in the feminine, because opposite energies attract sexually and same energies repel sexually. So let's talk Mean Girls. I actually realized that I actually reference this movie a lot in a lot of videos when I'm talking about wounded masculine energy and women. And I thought, you know what, because I reference this so much, I really should just do a breakdown of this movie. I have to say that this movie, I feel like, was kind of the Clueless of the millennials. Clueless was kind of my generation's teen movie, and Mean Girls was kind of like from a little bit younger. So I hadn't seen this movie as many times as, like, say I've seen Clueless. I could recite the scenes from Clueless like by heart. I've only seen Mean Girls a few times, so I didn't know the movie quite as well, but there are so many iconic pop culture scenes from this movie. And I do want to say, honestly, this film was written by Tina Fey. She's also one of the stars of this movie, and I do think that Tina Fey is a brilliant comedy writer, so I do want to give credit where credit is due. I am about to tear apart the film though. I do want to say that, like, yeah, it's cute. It's got a lot of pop culture stuff in it, but I have a lot to say about the film and how it's representing women and girls and things like that. I mentioned this in my Clueless breakdown that I hesitate doing breakdowns of teens or high school years or things like that. I tend to try to focus on adults because I do think that when you're talking about things like masculine and feminine energies, and particularly talking about things like sexual polarity, I really want to get away from the sexualization of underage children, particularly of underage girls, because I think that it's so rampant, and I'm going to get into that too in this breakdown. I think films like this, because they are so iconic and also they kind of show the immature side to the masculine and feminine energies, and I think they say a lot about our society in general and how young girls are kind of being conditioned nowadays, that I wanted to include it. But I say this with hesitation because I don't love focusing on the sexualization of young girls. I might as well just start there. One of my issues with a movie like this is that there is this incredible sexualization of these teen girls. Now, granted, I'm pretty sure most, if not all, of these girls are actually much older than they're portraying in the movie. I saw behind the scenes of this movie, and I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, that Lindsay Lohan was actually originally supposed to play Regina George. Because of the age gap, like Rachel McAdams is actually so much older. Because of that age gap, it just didn't work, and so they ended up switching them and having Rachel McAdams play Regina George because she was a little bit older and her character was kind of supposed to be a little bit more grown, so to speak, and so they flipped it because of that. I don't know how true that is. I remember hearing that somewhere. And in fact, Amy Poehler actually plays Regina George's mother, and I'm pretty sure that Amy Poehler and Rachel McAdams, like, in age are actually, like, not very far apart in age. Like, Amy Poehler is like maybe like 10 years older than Regina George, and they were playing mother and daughter. So these are adults, but they're portraying teens, and this over-sexualization of teen girls, I think, is just, I've talked about this in other videos. I've mentioned this in my Phantom of the Opera breakdown and a few other videos. This idea that we really fetishize young girls, and this concept of, like, getting a young girl, like, before she becomes legal and everything, and the stats on, like, teen pregnancy and the number of teen pregnancies that are the result of older men that are actually impregnating teen girls, and the whole idea that it's become so socially acceptable in our society to have these young girls be so sexualized. I've even referenced this before the Halloween party, that it's like the Halloween is supposed to be like the one time of year that these girls can dress like sluts and nobody can shame them, which in reality the way that they dress on Halloween is not all that much different than the way they're dressing every day. I'm not saying this to, like, slut shame anybody, but the fact that we're pushing these young girls into being so adult and so over sexualized when they're not even actual adults, I think is really sick. And it's movies like this, it's the media in general, it's, you know, you could argue it's in porn and all these kind of things. We're really conditioning. I know people are going to argue that yes, men are attracted to younger women for sure, but we are conditioning men to find these not legal girls to be the epitome of beauty, when at the end of the day, a woman's value is much more than just her being young. And I have a whole video talking about the value of older women, which I highly recommend that you check out. I'm not trying to pit older women against younger women or anything like that, but I went into this more in my Phantom of the Opera breakdown, because I do think that we have these young girls who overly sexualize themselves because of this pressure to feel more adult. And especially when we don't have, in this movie in particular, you have like Regina's mom, who is kind of like pushing her to be more sexual. You only see her dad in one brief part of the movie, and he seems very like grumpy that his daughter is dressing very provocatively, but he's not doing anything about it. So like, there's no fathers in this situation who are actually protecting these girls. Even Caddy's father, and I'll get into these characters in a minute, I just got on a roll here. Even Caddy's father, like, he grounds her, but then he doesn't even know that, like, what grounding means. Her mom is just like, where'd she go? He's like, oh, she went out. What, they're not allowed to go out when they're grounded? Like, he didn't know. With him, that was naivete, but you have fathers that aren't actually, some of them are there, but they're not actually stepping up and protecting their daughters. So you have this whole environment where you have these girls gone wild. I think they even reference Girls Gone Wild in this movie a few times. These girls going wild and going out and doing these things, and nobody is protecting them. And particularly when girls are underage, when they're under the age of 18, they're still in high school. It's the job of adults, of parents, to be protecting these girls. And yes, teens are they're gonna do things, they're gonna go crazy, they're gonna, you know, experiment, they're gonna rebel. Like, that's all normal for teens to do that. But a part of being the adult, the parent in their situation, or the parental figure in these kids' lives, is to be able to keep them safe and protect them, so that the choices they make when they're teens don't ruin the rest of their lives. And I think that this is really important. And I know I got on this tangent, but I really do find the sexualization of these really underage young girls, at least in this movie, they're portraying underage girls, to be a problem. Like, I think it's dangerous. It messes with girls' heads. I could go off on a whole spiel about, you know, these girls who end up then transitioning into, you know, doing OnlyFans, or actually doing porn or things like that, or whatever. It just makes them more angry and bitter about life, because that could be a whole tangent. I'm not gonna go down that road. I could do a whole video talking about that if you want. I just want to state that when I talk about this and the energies in this movie, there's always that underlying theme of, I don't like the fact that we are sexualizing these young girls. All I wanted to say. But let's now get into the characters. I know there's this big debate, and I've mentioned this in other videos, about the concept of toxic masculinity. And there's this confusion as to whether or not toxic masculinity is a real thing or whether it's not. I prefer to call it wounded masculinity, and it's actually when masculinity is not in its healthiest form and people are actually acting out of a false sense of masculinity and in a way that's actually abusive. So for example, a healthy masculine person is going to be very grounded, and they're going to be able to protect, and they may have to fight in order to protect. Whereas a wounded masculine or toxically masculine person is going to hurt or abuse or attack someone solely for the purpose of their own ego, to make themselves feel better, and it actually is out to hurt as opposed to with the intentions of protection. Instead of arguing, which a lot of people do, that like toxic or wounded masculinity is not a thing, which it totally is a thing, I would actually make the argument, I've mentioned this in other videos, wounded masculine, toxic masculine behavior can be found in women as well. And I actually do think we have a huge problem of it in women as well. Now, there are many women right now today who are in their masculine. Most of the girls in this movie in high school are very much in their masculine energy, and I'm going to get into that. And sometimes when women are in their masculine energy, even if it's not their core energy, it can be healthy. Like, it can be necessary in that moment. It can be a positive thing if a woman is using it in a positive way. When a woman starts using her masculine energy in order to hurt people, in order to abuse people out of her own ego needs, whether it's a man or a woman, but in this case we're talking about women, that's when it becomes toxic behavior. This is where you see the difference in, like, Caddy initially in the movie. Caddy's character, played by Lindsay Lohan, she's very masculine. Like, she's very much in a grounded masculine energy, I would say. She's very logical, she's very practical. She's seeing the world from fresh eyes because she's going to high school for the first time. There's this kind of sense of practicality with things because she doesn't really know the social interactions. So she thinks of things in a very logical form. It's why she's actually very good at math in this movie. However, someone like Regina, who's very much in her masculine energy, it's very wounded because she needs to tear other people down to make herself feel better. Caddy starts spending more time with Regina, and that that wounded behavior starts to rub off onto Caddy, and she starts to become just as wounded and toxic as Regina is. That's not always the case, right? It's not necessarily always that the wounded person drags down the other person, but that is very common, particularly when we're talking about young people who are a little bit more easily influenced by the world around them. You could easily also make the parallel between the fact that Caddy is so naive. She's actually even more naive just for a junior in high school, because she was homeschooled and she was living in another country, and so she did not have the same socialization that most American teens have. I'm not saying this to knock homeschooling or anything like that. Honestly, I think nowadays, I think that's a pretty good option for people. But just focused on the concept of the movie, she didn't have the typical school experience up until her junior year. So she was actually very young and naive, which I think this could be an easy parallel between the idea of these young girls who are very naive, very easily manipulated, and grown men step in and then kind of try to mold them and manipulate them into being the way they want, and it ends up affecting them in the similar way that Caddy ends up getting caught up in Regina, who's a very wounded masculine character, in just a friendship situation. But Regina is able to manipulate Caddy, and Caddy actually thinks she's manipulating Regina. She ends up becoming wounded and in her masculine energy, trying to fight Regina because Regina's actually being very toxic and abusive to her. You could very easily parallel this with an older, more manipulative man preying on this young girl who is very sort of fresh, new, and naive. She then becomes very bitter. She may think she's playing him, but he's actually playing her. She then grows up and then ends up becoming very wounded and bitter and toxic as well because of the manipulation. And I think, I mean, again, this movie doesn't end that way. It wraps it up in a nice little bow because it's Hollywood. But again, I didn't want to make this whole thing into like an older men manipulating younger women video, because I talk about that in a lot of other videos, but there is a parallel there. Like Regina really is, she's not really older in age, but she's older in life experience and maturity, and she steps in and is manipulating a young girl who is more naive. And this young girl ends up picking up on Regina's toxic behavior. Even though she thinks she's manipulating Regina, she's essentially becoming the same person that Regina is. So we're talking about a whole group of girls who are really stepping into this very wounded masculine energy. Regina for sure has an ego. She's a serious ego issue. It's a very wounded masculine structure though. Yes, she does have the girly look to her. Like, again, they refer to her as being like a Barbie doll, but at the end of the day, she's very masculine in her energy. She's always under control. She's always looking to, she's obsessing over the calories she eats, what she eats. She always wants to lose 3 pounds because she's obsessed with structure of her meals, of her food. She's obsessed with, like, on this day we wear this color, on, you know, you're required to do this if you're going to be in her circle. Like, she's so into that structure, and it's not from a structured place of leadership and direction. It's from a structured place of making herself feel dominant and controlling. She has multiple boyfriends going because she doesn't want somebody else to have the boyfriend that she gave up, even though she doesn't want him anymore. It's that need to control and manipulate the situation. That's all wounded masculine energy. The idea that, I mean, like the backstory with her and Janice, with the fact that Regina was actually ditching Janice for a boyfriend, which Regina thought was absolutely justified, and then decided to turn it into, okay, well, Janice must be a lesbian and have a crush on me, because Regina doesn't understand the concept of love and connection, because she's blocked off from that because she's in her wounded masculine. When you're in your wounded masculine, you tend to have no connection to your feminine energy. Feminine energy is love and connection. It's friendship, it's sisterhood. So the concept that somebody who is in her wounded masculine, a woman who's in her wounded masculine, would have a female friend who actually wanted her friendship, her connection, as a wounded masculine, you're gonna block that out because that's not in your realm of thinking. You're thinking of everything as being structured, as being of control. You don't want that open-hearted love and connection. So you're gonna start labeling it. I mean, not everyone's gonna label it as a lesbian, but that does happen. And Caddy actually slips into that as well too. When Janice wants Caddy's friendship, like genuine friendship, and Caddy turns into like, what, are you just obsessed with me? Are you in love with me? And like Janice is like, you know, you girls always think that we're in love with you when actually we hate you. Janice doesn't actually hate them. She actually wanted the friendship. She wanted the love and connection because she was befriending women who were in their wounded masculine and were shut off from being able to be in that feminine love and connection. They then labeled Janice as having something wrong with her because she was different, because she actually wanted that community and connection. That's sisterhood wounding right there. And I'm going to do a whole video talking about sisterhood wounding, so be sure you subscribe and stay tuned for that. I'm not going to delve into that too much, although this movie is really the epitome of sisterhood wounding. I would say that the behavior that happens in this movie, while it's extreme and over the top, is probably something that every single girl today has been through. We end up holding that within us, and then we end up resenting other women. It's rampant nowadays. This is something that I don't think a lot of people understand because it's not common in our current culture. However, feminine energy is not competitive. Feminine energy, feminine women, feminine beings are not designed to compete with each other. We're not designed to compete with men. We're not designed to be competitive. Now, that doesn't mean that as a woman that you don't have the ability to compete, but that's your masculine energy. Your feminine energy does not want to compete with another. The masculine is about competition. The feminine is about love and connection. We're supposed to see each other as sisters. We're not supposed to see each other as competitors. And in this movie, the fact that the whole idea of this entire movie is that these girls are all backstabbing each other, gossiping about each other, treating each other so disrespectfully and so cruelly just for ego boosts and things like that. I mean, that's something that has been put on us in society as something that women are supposed to do. We get pitted against each other because it weakens us, because women are very strong and powerful when we're together. I actually mentioned this in much more detail in my Witches of Eastwick video, is the power of women when we're in groups and we're in communities and we're together. If you keep us isolated and you keep us competing with each other so we see each other as enemies, we're weaker and easier to control. This movie is such an example of that wounding, of that masculine wounding, and we condition girls from a young age. If you think about it, the whole concept of the structure of schooling is to keep us in these structured, directional, masculine mentalities. These were designed for men. These schools, these structures were designed for men to train young boys to become focused masculine leaders. These school structures were not designed for girls. Part of it was because young girls were not allowed to be a part of schooling. However, when we do now have girls in schools, girls are so much more adaptable. So women are taking to education and they're taking to being a part of the structure so well because women are very adaptable. We absolutely are. So we take to this, but it pushes us into this masculine drive and focus. We're capable of that, and in certain situations it's beneficial for women to know how to do that. However, if women are living from this state all the time and we're not actually tapping into our feminine, we're literally living from our masculine energy, which most of these girls are, it just trains and conditions us to be now in our masculine as adults. And now we see other women as competitors. We don't actually see other women as being a sisterhood. And when we actually shut off any of that love and connection at all and shut off our feminine energy completely, you get characters like Regina who are in their wounded masculine because they don't have any connection to their feminine energy. If you notice even the conditioning when Caddy first starts hanging out with the plastics, which is Regina and her girls, like Caddy has no sense of like comparing her body to somebody else. Like she doesn't understand the concept of having a bad body image because it's not something that's ever been projected onto her. So when she sees these girls who are absolutely gorgeous and the epitomes of perfection in high school terms, and they're criticizing themselves, they're tearing apart themselves because they're so critical, because they're absolute perfectionists about their physical appearance. Perfectionism, masculine energy. The feminine does not care about perfection. The feminine does not care about it at all. The feminine does not want perfect. The feminine is messy. The feminine is chaotic. Okay, it's the masculine that needs the perfection of the structure. The fact that these girls are in their masculine and picking apart their physical appearance like that, Caddy now starts to feel like, oh, well, maybe I need to pick apart my physical appearance because she is witnessing other girls do that. And that's where it gets, we get conditioned, and we see, you know, girls today, we see our mothers having criticized themselves and their bodies. How often do we catch ourselves? Like if you actually paid attention to how often in a day we say something self-critical or put ourselves down. As women, probably, even if we just paid attention to how often we do that about our appearance. I mean, I'm sure we do that in other areas, but just in our appearance, if you actually paid attention to that, the younger generation, the younger girls, they're listening in the same way we were listening to our mothers and grandmothers talking about themselves that way. That's learned behavior. That's not the feminine. That's not the natural feminine essence in us. That's a conditioned behavior that's getting passed down. And I would actually encourage every woman out there, if you do find yourself in that situation where you're being overly critical of yourself, and especially if you're saying these things out loud, to really try to catch yourself when you do it. Like, see if you can cut back, because it's not going to be an overnight fix. But just see if you can cut back on doing that, because it's not just beneficial for you, but it's beneficial for every other woman on the planet. And I think that this is important to heal, because you just never know how many younger women are actually watching you and admiring you, and you just don't know how many people you actually influence in everyday life. Now, Regina is so much in her wounded masculine, and I would say that Caddy gets in her wounded masculine a lot in the movie. Gretchen does as well, definitely. Gretchen, who's one of the plastics, Regina's friend, kind of her sidekick. They do very much get in their wounded masculine. Gretchen seriously has an ego thing going on. However, both of them actually, when they're with Regina, get very wounded feminine. And Caddy even points it out at one point that even when she's trying to take down Regina because she hates her, she still wants Regina's approval. Like, Regina has so much control over them, which is very much a manipulative relationship, which is usually a sign of a wounded masculine behavior. All of a sudden now, like, Caddy and Gretchen shift into this wounded feminine of like, I need her to like me. As much as they're angry at her or frustrated with her at any point, like, they have this desperate need for Regina to like them, and they're willing to put their own needs and their own desires and wants on hold because they need Regina's approval. In fact, Gretchen even makes the comment about never dating somebody's ex-boyfriend, like, that's just feminism, which is really a funny line. The idea that, like, you would never pick out a skirt, even if you really love the skirt, if your friends didn't approve. Like, you need other people's approval in order to make a move. That's very wounded feminine, like not being able to make up your own mind and make your own decisions. Like, that's a wounded feminine behavior of that constant need for somebody else's attention. And as much as these girls in general, like, they're in their wounded masculine, when you get around another wounded masculine who maybe is more powerful, can very easily shift you now into your wounded feminine. And this is actually, like, we think of these energies as being like a sexual polarity thing, but this isn't even like a sexual polarity thing. This is just like a regular, like, friendship dynamic thing. Because these girls are young and in high school, they are sort of more easily manipulated by their environment, because, you know, all of us when we're younger tend to be a little less strong in our independence or strong in our confidence about making decisions. So we are more easily manipulated when we're younger because, you know, we haven't really stepped into our own and gained our own sense of self, which is why it was so easy for these girls to now shift in and out of that energy. But, you know, I always say, look, I mean, when you think of a toxic masculine man or a wounded masculine man, you think of the concept of he's like beating somebody up or he's physically abusing somebody. However, the gossip, the manipulation, the backstabbing, which all of these girls in high school are all doing like rampantly, that's all toxically masculine, because they're seeing each other as competitors and trying to abuse and tear these girls down. Even if they're not doing it to their face, they're doing it as a way of hurting and manipulating somebody else to make themselves feel better. That's very wounded masculine behavior. So these girls have now been pushed, because most cultures believe that women would naturally tap into their feminine energy and would just be feminine beings if there wasn't intervention, which is one of the reasons why Caddy doesn't really know too much about how this stuff works, because she's coming into it with fresh eyes. She does have more masculine structure initially, simply obviously because of her parents and the way she was raised, but she doesn't have that wounding because she hasn't really been exposed to the manipulation of the real world, I suppose you could say, or, you know, you might say she was in the real world, but, you know, the high school life, so to speak. So she wasn't tainted. So while she did have that masculine structure, she didn't have the wounding that came from being in the mainstream world, in the mainstream environment that these other girls were growing up in, so they were getting manipulated. Even at the end of the movie, they mentioned like the next generation of plastics and how they were going to take care of them. The current plastics learned that behavior from somewhere. I mean, Regina's mom is basically like egging her on with everything that she's doing. So like that behavior comes from somewhere. I want to point out what wounded masculine energy looks like in women, particularly in younger girls. And this is a behavior that has been put on us. It's not a natural behavior as to how women would naturally evolve. So I want to point that out, because that's important. That like this kind of cattiness, the gossiping, the backstabbing, the mean girl mentality, that's not natural to feminine women. That's a toxic behavior, and that's a wounded masculine behavior in women. So if you're doing these things, if you're battling back and forth or trying to steal someone's man or trying to keep this man just to piss this person off or bad-mouthing this person or this and that, like, that's not feminine behavior. That none of that is feminine behavior. That is all a behavior that has been put on women in order to keep us weak and separated. So that was really the gist of this movie, because this movie really does focus more on female friendships and female interactions. There are a few other things that I wanted to note about the movie that I think are really interesting in pointing out. And this is just such a throwaway scene. I don't even know if people even really remember this, but this stuck out to me the first time I watched this movie, is the concept that Caddy had come from basically traveling with her parents in Africa, and she was homeschooled. So she had a very sort of like natural, more like earthy upbringing. So when she's in high school, she gets up at one point to go use the bathroom, and the teacher's like, where are you going? She's like, I need to use the bathroom. He's like, you need to get a pass. And she's like, well, can I have a pass? And it's like, yeah, nice try, sit down. And she's like, I've never had adults not trust me. Think about how crazy that is. That's something that I've always been blown away by. It's like having to go to the bathroom is such a natural human biological function. But the fact that when we're in schools, it's regulated. It's like we literally tell people when they can go and when they can't. You need permission to go. Particularly as women, we're talking about women having to go through, you know, in their teen years, having to go through learning their menstrual cycles and things like that. I understand the reasoning for needing to keep it structured, because there are people who have abused the privilege and people who've just gone off to smoke in the bathrooms or ditch school or whatever. Like, I understand that. However, think about how crazy that is. Like, think about that for a second. The fact that you have a school environment where you send kids off to this like prison essentially to manipulate them and indoctrinate them. And I know my conspiracy theory hat is popping up here, but like, you control when they go to the bathroom and when they don't. I mean, I know when I was in school, like, you weren't even allowed to use the bathroom in between class periods, but then you'd go to class and the teacher would be like, no, you can't get a pass in my class, you need to stay here. And it's just like, okay, but when are we allowed to use the bathroom? Like, that part of this movie for me, like the first time I watched it, like that was the thing that stuck out in my head. I'm like, yes, like, it is insane that we keep that, something like that is so natural and biological, we keep that structured. Like, we expect people to control when they go to the bathroom and when they don't. But yet then we also have men who use the argument that they can't control their sexual urges because that's just their biology. And it's like, okay, but there's a lot of biology that we're expected to keep under control. So men should be able to keep that under control too. Just a side note, I thought I'd throw that in. The character of Karen is just cute. I mean, she's kind of not a central part of the movie. She's one of the plastics, and she's so dumb. And I do think that I would call her wounded feminine in a sense, because she really has no sense of being able to protect herself. She is very open-hearted. I mean, she's very likable because she's so, like, she doesn't get mad. She doesn't really get anything that affects her really too much because she's not very bright. She's not really going to be able to protect herself when she grows up because she is so out there. I do think it is funny though when she says she has like a fifth sense, and it's like, it's her ESPN, like, which is kind of a cheesy joke, but, and it's like her boobs can tell when it's raining. It's like, well, it can tell when it's currently raining, like, but that concept of women's bodies being tapped into nature, like, that's actually a real thing. Like, it's, I know we're trying to make that into something funny, and like her boobs can sense the weather and stuff, but as women, our bodies are, we're part of nature. Like, the feminine is part of nature. Like, we are nature. So as much as it's supposed to be coming from this like dumb character, and it's kind of like they're trying to make fun of it, it's actually kind of true. So I wanted to make a note of that. Also, the school sex education. I mean, it's literally like, don't have sex or you'll get chlamydia. Like, that's literally the message. And this could be a whole video in itself, but like, in America, our sex education system is abysmal. Like, it's really abysmal. And I'm not talking about like the intricacies of the sacredness of sex or anything like that. Like, I'm literally talking about the basic biology of the reproductive system and stuff. It's abysmal. I understand that in this country, because even in America, we do still have somewhat of a purity culture, so to speak, where they want to encourage abstinence. So it's like, well, the less we teach about sex, the more kids will abstain. That's actually not really what's happening. And look, I'm all for teaching teens to abstain. I'm all for teaching people to wait, because I do think that particularly when you're a teen, you're not really ready for the consequences of sex, the physical and the emotional consequences of sex. And you're probably not ready to deal with the possible side effects and dangers that come with sex. So I'm all for encouraging teens, particularly like teens who are still in high school and underage, to wait. I'm all for that. That said, the statistics are showing that the less you are teaching teens about sex, particularly the reproductive organs, the more likely they are to have sex. There's a lot of stats that show that in other countries where they have a much more in-depth sexual education system, they actually have a much lower rate of teen pregnancy, and they also find that teens are becoming sexually active much later in life. So in America, we need a better sex education system. I would argue, because I don't personally at this point have a ton of faith in the public school system, I would argue that those things really need to be passed down ancestrally. Unfortunately, because of the destruction of the family unit, that is a difficult thing to sell. I mean, I would not want Regina George's mom to be the one teaching kids about sex education, because she's clearly just trying to be the cool mom. However, I do really think that we need to be teaching young girls, and from a young age, about the value of their feminine body, the value of the reproductive system. I have videos talking about women and their standards, the value of women, all those things. Like, young girls need to be taught those things. We have this whole society where we're actually teaching and conditioning young girls, because of the media and things like that, that a woman's value is just in how sexually appealing she is to a man. And we don't teach girls the value of their own bodies beyond that, beyond just men thinking that they're sexy. The value of the fact that every single human on this planet is here because a woman decided to risk her life in order to bring a person into the world. She literally used her body to house a living being and birth it through her body, to bring another being into, and every single person on this planet is here because of that. And I think that if we teach young girls the value of that, the value of your feminine body and what makes your feminine body different from the masculine body, our reproductive systems, the fact that we have the ability to choose which men get to carry on their seed to a new generation. Like, if we taught women that power within them, I think a lot of girls would be much more selective about who they go around sharing their body with. And you wouldn't see all of this, you know, these teenagers who are just hooking up with everybody, and these girls who are just like running around with everybody, because women need to learn the value of our bodies and what our bodies really do bring to the world, and know that as women, we have the ability to decide which men we allow access to our bodies. And I think that teaching girls from a young age that is actually going to make the whole world just a much better, safer place for women and for just society in general. So thank you for coming to my TED Talk. The relationship between Caddy and Aaron, to be honest, is really kind of a throwaway relationship. He's just kind of a pawn in the game that like Regina and Caddy are kind of playing with each other, and Caddy really does have a crush on him, but it's just a teen romance. It's really not anything that's gonna last. And the theme that I really want to get across is that Caddy is incredible at math. Aaron is okay at math. Caddy starts dumbing herself down and acting like she's not as good at math so that she can get Aaron to tutor her so she can get his attention. She even starts failing her class because she needs to sell to him that she's not very good at math, even though she massively excels at math. Here's the thing. There are a lot of women who do that. There's a lot of women who believe they have to do that. There's a difference between this constant need to prove that you're better than men, this constant need to overshadow men, like that neediness to be like, I'm an overachiever, I need to be better than men, I need to prove that I'm better than men. Like, that's one energy. That's different than just being your best self and expecting a man to either meet you or surpass you. If you dim yourself down, if you dull your light, if you make yourself less smart, beautiful, talented, whatever, like you lessen yourself for a man, you may get that man temporarily, maybe not, but you might get him, but you're never gonna respect him. As a woman, you need a man who has more direction, has more intelligence, you need a man to be better than you in order for you to respect him. So if you are out there trying to tear men down, well, that's not really healthy. Like, that probably comes from some wounding. But if you dumb yourself down or dim your light for a man, if you get him, you're never gonna respect him. Which is why it's always important as a woman, you don't want to come from like a overachiever, perfectionist, like a place that's gonna burn you out. But you also never want to lessen yourself. You want to play full out. Like, just play your full game. Like, play full out. And then anyone who is intimidated by the fullness of your whatever you are, whatever you're doing, your intelligence, your beauty, your humor, your whatever it is, like anybody who's intimidated by that, just gonna fall off to the side. They're not gonna matter. And they're not for you anyway. But then the people who can meet you or surpass you, they're the people who are going to be in your world. And I would encourage every woman to, again, like, don't burn yourself out trying to prove that you're the best at everything, but never dim yourself in order to be more appealing, especially to a man, because you're not going to respect him in the long run, and the relationship is just going to be doomed. I honestly don't really think that Caddy and Aaron are ever going to make it in life. I mean, they're high school sweethearts, so it is what it is, but she's going to want a man who's smarter than she is, and Aaron's just not that guy. I wanted to note, because she does do that throughout the movie, and as I'm watching it, I'm like, girl, you're not going to respect him. Like, what is the point? Like, there's no point in this, right? In the same way that, like, you know, her and Regina are kind of, you know, playing Aaron back and forth. That's really an ego thing, to be totally honest with you. Like, Regina's not really even interested in Aaron. She's just dating Aaron because she doesn't want Caddy to have him, but Regina's actually dating another guy, and, you know, she's got all these men, which is all just from ego. She doesn't care about any of these guys. That's the wounded masculine coming out. It's just the ego thing. At the end of the day, like, Caddy kind of got caught up in Aaron because she thought he was attractive, but that's gonna fizzle, and she's gonna realize that she needs someone who's smarter than her in the long run. Tina Fey's character, Miss Norbury, I actually think she's a really great teacher in the sense that she seems really invested in the students. She seems to really care. You know, she's going through a lot of stuff in her personal life. You get little glimpses of it here and there, but she seems like she actually genuinely cares about her students and actually wants them to succeed. And actually, when the burn book comes out and the whole school kind of blows up, like, she's the one who kind of steps in as that, like, the elder, wiser, really the wise woman figure. I would say she really steps into that wise woman role of really kind of trying to guide these girls into healing a lot of this toxic behavior. I'm not trying to knock Tina Fey or say that she's old. She's not that old in this movie, but she is kind of like the wise woman elder that steps in and is really guiding these young girls and really trying to help them heal and work through some of these issues that they have. And I think honestly, like, we need more women to step in and be that guidance. As much as our society is in desperate need for masculine leadership, we need feminine leadership to lead with inspiration, to help guide young girls. I mean, these are the women that should be teaching women about the value of their body, that should be the ones teaching women about sex education, not some, you know, male health teacher that probably doesn't know that much about the female reproductive system anyway. You know, we need these elder wise women to help guide and inspire the younger girls in order to value themselves and to actually embrace their feminine energy. And I think Tina Fey's character really does that so well, and that she's really trying to help these girls come together as a community and not see each other as enemies. And I really do like the way that she does that in that montage of healing and stuff. I think that's just really, it's a beautiful scene. Now, of course, Regina gets hit by a bus. She gets injured. She has to recover. She goes through this trauma, and they actually mentioned at the end that her physical therapist told her to get out her anger in sports, so she becomes a jock. And it's interesting because they mention that because the jocks aren't afraid of her. Reality, really, she's channeling her masculine energy. Regina's still masculine. I'm not saying that you can't be feminine and play sports. However, that competitiveness, competing with each other, checking each other, that whole kind of thing, that's a very masculine camaraderie. And it's a sign that Regina really is very masculine. She just is. And the fact that she then thrives in an environment where women are much more competitive and most women are more in their masculine energy, maybe she's actually a masculine core being. I don't know. I mean, it's rare that a woman is actually masculine at her core, you know, but maybe she is. Maybe she is actually masculine at her core, because she tends to thrive in her healthy masculine much more than she thrived in her wounded masculine. Obviously, like, whatever your core energy or whatever energy you're in, you're always better off being in the healthy version of that. Maybe she actually is in her masculine energy because she tends to thrive when it becomes healthy, and that's what happens at the end. So there you go. This is a little bit more of an unconventional breakdown because it wasn't so much about specific scenes. It was more about the characters and the energies in general, and it actually was more about sisterhood and things like that. So just a little different type of breakdown, but I wanted to do this because I feel like every time I reference wounded masculine energy in women, I bring up this movie. So I feel like I really needed to do a breakdown of this movie to have some kind of a reference. So if you have not seen this movie, or even if you have after you watch this video, I highly recommend you watch it, see if you can pick up on these things. This movie is the perfect example of wounded masculine energy in women. If you have any thoughts on this video, this movie, or any other film recommendations, let me know. Leave a comment in the comment section below. I love to hear from you, and I love your suggestions. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a big thumbs up, and be sure you subscribe to my channel. If you would like to connect to your healthy feminine energy, I have online courses. Details are in the description box below, along with links to all my social media accounts. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.